Hi, it's Mayor Sandy Brown of the town of Orangeville, and this is Talk 519 on Rogers TV. This is where we discuss the issues that are important to the residents of Orangeville and Dufferin County. The idea of universal basic income has been around since the 60s, first proposed by economist Milton Friedman. It's been gaining some additional attention during the pandemic. Basic income would give every adult the same fixed monthly payment regardless of work status, health, or wealth. Today, I'm joined by Green Party of Ontario leader Mike Schreiner. Mike, welcome.
Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. We want to find out more about what a green recovery could look like for Ontarians, and we're going to touch on that. But first of all, Mike, I wonder if you could give your thoughts about this idea of universal basic income.
Yeah, Greens have long supported a guaranteed livable income or a basic income as the most efficient and cost-effective way to eliminate poverty and the costs associated with poverty. And I think this pandemic is really, particularly in the early days of COVID, has really highlighted the flaws in our social safety nets and just how many people fell through the cracks. And so to make sure that we have a system in place that, when the next emergency or crisis hits, that there's a floor that nobody goes below. And that's really what a basic income is all about. And happy to get into some of the more details around that. But the one thing I will mention is that, there's a report that came out this summer that poverty costs the province of Ontario about $33 billion a year. About $4 billion just directly related to healthcare costs. And a basic income eliminating poverty would be much less expensive than the $33 billion that poverty is costing the province right now.
Right. I was thinking about the administrative cost of government, and all of these social programs cost a lot of money to administer. And so with the universal basic income, you could probably eliminate some of that administration that's going on in other parts of the government. Is that true?
Yeah, one of the things that government talks a lot about, particularly the current provincial government, is getting rid of red tape. Well, I would argue some of the people who experience the most red tape in our society are people living in poverty. So much of our social safety systems are about policing the poor. And that takes a lot of resources to hire government bureaucrats to police the poor. And it also means that people just live an undignified life where you have to fill out applications to access this benefit or to access this service or to get access to these opportunities. And if we can eliminate a lot of that bureaucracy and just provide money directly to people who are in need, that would certainly eliminate a lot of those bureaucratic costs. I mean, you want to be able to get rid of all services. Like, for example, people with disabilities still need access for programs, for example, to help them be able to afford mobility devices and things like that, or programs designed to address affordable housing. So there would still be some of those kinds of programs and services, even with a basic income you would need, but there are some that you could eliminate. And more importantly, you could eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy that's really designed around policing the poor.
Right. You just mentioned affordable housing. In your community of Guelph, has there been any affordable housing initiatives by the municipality you're aware of?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work around housing affordability in Guelph right now. We recognize it as a huge problem. It's another one of those challenges that COVID really highlighted. How do you self-isolate? How do you quarantine if you don't have an affordable place to call home? And so we have a number of proposals that we're working on around affordable and also supportive housing, because obviously some people, particularly people who are experiencing mental health and addictions challenges, in addition to housing, they need the sort of wraparound support services as well. And my hope is that with some of the money that the federal government has put forward around affordable housing, the National Housing Strategy, combined with some of the work that the current government is doing around housing affordability, that not only in places like Guelph, but communities like Orangeville and others around the province, that we can really start addressing the housing affordability challenges that so many individuals and families are facing right now.
I took some, philosophy and some psychology courses at university, and I remember talking about Maslow's hierarchy. For those of you who are listening or watching, that know about that, basic needs like food and shelter are important for the human condition. And until those conditions are met, it's difficult to tackle things like mental health issues and drug addiction issues. And so, the kinder, gentler society would provide those things so that people can get started on correcting some of the other problems in their lives. And the universal basic income, I guess, would go a long way to helping that and spurring on affordable housing. I was up in Ottawa last year, Mike, at the National Housing Strategy Conference, and there was talk about CMHC and the fact that they've got a lot of money that they're sitting on. This is money collected from those who have purchased homes with less than 20% down payment, who have to pay mortgage insurance. And certainly in Southern Ontario, there's been very few foreclosures or times when that mortgage insurance had to be used. So they've got it sitting on a pile of money. And I think it's a great idea that the federal government is trying to use some of that money to spur affordable housing and to provide financing to municipalities and other special interest groups that might want to start on that process.
Yeah, and what I think what's really important about that is that money can leverage other money from the private sector or from nonprofit organizations around then having the capital to build affordable housing. And you're very right. This around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you make an excellent point there. And there's been numerous research showing that the costs of not housing people are, again, far higher than actually providing affordable housing for people. And, even just in my own conversations with the chief of police here in Guelph, for example, they're like, most Guelph police officers, they know people by first name who are experiencing homelessness, and which oftentimes is associated with mental health and addictions challenges as well. And partly they know them because they're constantly being called to take them to hospital, which then creates costs not only for police, but also for paramedics and emergency services. And then you have the cost to our healthcare system. All those costs pile up, and it'd be so much better if we could avoid those costs in the first place. And then the other thing is, I talked to a number of business owners, and particularly in our region, who are saying that increasingly it's becoming more challenging for them to find employees for their businesses because of lack of housing. And so I know of some business owners who are actually, buying houses and renting them to their workers so they can actually attract people to work for their company.
Well, that makes me think about the Whistler Housing Association. And if you Google that, you'll find that the town of Whistler and the businesses there back, I think it's maybe 25 years ago or more, realized that the dishwashers and the servers who are working in the restaurants and the hospitality industry in Whistler could not afford to live there. So embarked upon, initiative to build affordable housing. And it's very interesting because they have a chart, and I guess it's, you have to go through the process of being vetted, but based on your wages is how they determine your rent. And so they've taken rental properties out of the marketplace and determined what the rent will be so that people who work in that market can have affordable housing. So I know Collingwood is also looking at that because of the nature of the hospitality industry there and the fact that costs of homes in Collingwood are going up. So I was at a conference again in Collingwood where they were talking about this. I think it's the Blue Mountain Village Association is starting a similar program. It makes perfect sense, and it's a plan, I think, by business people to actually solve the problem. There was a need there, and they got involved. So it's not necessarily socialism or communism or whatever some people want to, paint affordable housing. It was a need that businesses had, and this is how they've come up with the solution to solve the problem. So I think it's a great initiative, and I think we need to look at more of that here in Orangeville. I'd like to see better affordable homes for seniors who are being priced out of the marketplace, even those that own their own homes, because of property tax increases and just general living costs. If you're on a fixed income, certainly CPP and old age security, that's not a lot of money to operate on. And so we need to find ways to house our seniors as well. But back to the universal basic income. So how do you propose for society to afford this? Where is the money going to come from? We talked about the cost of a police officer taking somebody in a mental health crisis. The police officer have to wait at the hospital until
exactly.
And so they could be there for 2-3 hours at, they're all making six figures. So, the money's really mounting there. But where does society come up with the money, Mike? Can you?
Yeah, Sandy, that's a great question. And I think a lot of that's associated with the political will to come up with it and the kind of society we want to live in. So in the last provincial election, the Green Party put forward a costed platform of how we could roll out a basic income in Ontario. And the cost at that time we calculated would be around $19 billion. And that actually was confirmed by Minister McLeod when she used to be the minister with the new government, saying that would be too expensive. And how we came up with a way of affording it was, first of all, reallocating some existing expenses that go into social safety nets, particularly Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support. We talked about a 1% increase on the largest corporations. So, 1% would still make Ontario's corporate tax rate for large corporations very competitive and still one of the lower ones in North America. And then we looked at increasing a slight increase for people who earn over $250,000 a year. And nothing that would be onerous or anything like that. We're talking a few percentage points. So that would pay for it. And we didn't even at that point calculate in the savings. So again, there's been a report this summer showing that poverty costs Ontario $33 billion a year. But we figured in our costing modeling to account for those savings wouldn't make it as rigorous as we wanted it to be. So we did it was, here's how much it would cost. Here's how we would pay for it. And then, hopefully we could then take those savings and either, look at, better supporting other areas of, so that leaves more money for healthcare or education or other affordable housing programs, et cetera. And so we felt that it was a very fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent approach to, addressing the issue, paying for the issue. And then the one
Mike,
thing
we have to take a break right now.
Sure.
We'll be back in a couple of minutes. We've got the leader of the Green Party of Ontario, Mike Schreiner, with us today on Talk 519. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, welcome back to Talk 519. Now we're continuing our conversation with Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario. Mike, again, thank you for joining us. Just before the break, we were talking about universal basic income and, wondering if we could wave our magic wand and go back before the pandemic. And if this was in place, it probably would have been paid for a couple times over by the amount of money that the federal government has been spending. But again, hindsight's 2020. I did want to just, there's going to be some opposition, obviously, to the universal basic income. I wonder if you could talk about things that, people are saying, like a lack of motivation to work and, things like this UBI is very expensive. Who's going to pay for it? So maybe you could touch upon some of those issues if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure, Sandy. So, I mean, I think right before the break, we talked about how to pay for it. So I think I'll focus on what is the most common criticism is lack of motivation to work. And, one of the things that the pilot project that Ontario had put in place that unfortunately the Ford government cut before the pilot was finished, which by the way was designed by Hugh Siegel, a former conservative. So this isn't necessarily a left-right issue here. But what that pilot was showing was that actually employment increased. And we've looked at other pilot projects in Canada previously, looking in the 1970s when there was a pilot done in Manitoba, but also looking at other jurisdictions and countries around the world, that actually people's employment goes up. And for those people who don't get better jobs or have more stability to be able to be employed, oftentimes they're not working because they're going back to, they can afford to get educated or retrained to then get hired into a higher paying job. Or in many cases, people start their own businesses because they have the economic security to be an entrepreneur. As you know, to take the risk of starting a business, you have to have some economic security in your life. Otherwise, you're not able to take that kind of risk. And so, one of the reasons that over 150 CEOs in Ontario have signed on to supporting a basic income is because they see it as a huge opportunity to incentivize more entrepreneurs and more risk taking and more job creation in Ontario. And then the final one is some people may not go into employment because they use the economic security from a basic income to care for a loved one. So, it might be a child who has special needs, or maybe a parent or a grandparent who are facing dementia, let's say, or in long-term care and need some additional family support. But most of the pilots that have been done show that people continue to want to work because you get a lot of benefits from work that are beyond the income. And also, even with the basic income, most people's jobs pay more than what the basic income would provide, and they would like to have that additional income.
Right. Well, the stress of worrying about, the money to pay your rent and to provide food on your table really, it causes mental health issues.
Exactly.
The motivation to get out and work is removed by that stress level. And so this, potentially could relieve that and as you said, to get back into the workforce. But there, you mentioned it hasn't been tested. It seemed to me, I remember reading there was a test in Manitoba,
That's right.
and from what I read, it was very successful. And then for political reasons, it was killed. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that Manitoba experience?
Yeah, so a community in Dauphin, Manitoba, back in the 1970s, and the research that has come out of that shows that employment levels did not go down. The only category of workers who did see a slight decrease in employment were young men, but it was because they went to college or they were participated in a university or a retraining program to upgrade their skills to get a better job. And so, in many cases, those were individuals sometimes who had dropped out of high school. So they were actually going back to finish their high school degree as well. And so, again, most of the examples, pilot project examples that have been out there, have not shown a decrease in people's motivation to work.
Right. Okay, if we can just change subjects here, there's been a lot of discussion about elder care in certainly there's been some tragedies at long-term care facilities. How do you think we could improve elder care in this province, Mike?
Yeah, Sandy, first of all, I just want to say, just it breaks my heart. So many of the people who have lost their loved ones in long-term care homes, and just some of the just horrific stories I've heard. And I just a shout out to so many of the frontline workers
Mhm.
in our long-term care facilities who, had to go to work and many days didn't have access to proper PPE, especially in the early days of the pandemic. And I think one of the best ways to improve elder care is to actually make the investments to provide a minimum standard of care of 4 hours a day in our long-term care homes. And that means hiring more personal support workers, more nurses, and more physicians to provide that care and to ensure that they're paid a decent wage. Personal support workers are some of the lowest paid employees in our society, and they're the ones who do the heavy lifting and hard work of caring for our elders. And so it's making those kinds of investments. But we also need to make sure that we have adequate home care available for those elders who want to stay in their homes. We need to address the affordability crisis for seniors, which you talked about in the previous segment, which is so vital. And I think we also need to look at some innovative ways for senior housing that reduce isolation. So, for example, in a number of European countries, they're adopting co-housing models where elders can have their own place, but be part of a community with shared kitchen space and living space and things like that
The
to
Golden
reduce
Girls,
loneliness.
the Golden Girls idea.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some, developers maybe thinking about that. I was in a purpose-built apartment in Guelph back a couple of years ago as a realtor, and it was, built a student residence, purpose-built, and but it would have been perfect for seniors. Each bedroom had its own bathroom, a common living area. So if you could get 4 seniors who were, compatible, it'd be a great place to live and to save money. Because I think the entire apartment was in the range of $2,000 a month. So $500 each, certainly affordable for seniors as well as for students. So
exactly.
Those are some of the interesting things that we can. The other thing that we need to do with elder care is better socialization of the seniors. I know from my own experience with my mother in a long-term care facility, there wasn't enough personal attention and socialization for residents there. There was the basic, medical needs were taken care of course, and feeding, but the interim periods, a lot of idle time, and when you're idle and your brain is idle, you start to spiral down. And I think dementia is tied to socialization and being able to speak. So anyway, but we're just about halfway through our last segment here, Mike. I want to give you a lot of time here to talk about the Green Recovery Plan and what you think we need to do as we come out of the pandemic. So I'll turn it over to you. That's Green Recovery.
Well, one of the things I've been promoting for is a green and caring recovery. And I think, first of all, it starts with respecting workers and especially frontline workers. I think this pandemic has really showed that there are a lot of essential workers in our society who, earn minimum wage or barely above minimum wage. And we need to make sure those workers receive adequate pay and benefits and things like, let's get rid of sick notes and just some things like that would add more dignity to the workplace. And then secondly, I believe we need to be investing in emerging markets. And one of the things I've been really pushing hard is Ontario is perfectly positioned to have a completely made in Ontario electric vehicle production. Everything from the mining, we have the minerals here in Ontario needed for batteries and battery storage, all the way through to, actually parts manufacturing and assembling the vehicles. And so I was very excited when Ford announced that their Oakville plant, with government support, making a substantial investment in building the vehicles of the future. So that's one. Two, we have huge opportunities around battery storage, which is related to electric vehicle, but scaling it up to make renewable energy really cost effective. Huge demand for that around the world. Ontario is well positioned, again, to mine the minerals and produce the batteries and export them around the world. And then finally, for me, one of the biggest ones, and so many people are worried about energy costs, is having a province-wide deep retrofit program to help public buildings, businesses, and homeowners and renters retrofit their buildings to make them more energy efficient and help them reduce their energy costs. I know everyone is so concerned about the cost of electricity in Ontario, and I certainly understand and share that concern. Well, instead of throwing Band-Aids at it, which is what most governments do, why don't we get at the root of the problem, actually make our buildings more energy efficient, which will help homeowners and businesses save money, will help businesses be more competitive, but will also just create thousands and thousands of jobs, good jobs in the construction and trade sector and design and architecture, et cetera. And those are jobs you can't ship off to low wage jurisdictions either. And so I think it's really taking advantage of, the foundation we already have in Ontario, investing in emerging markets so we can be a global leader. And the added benefit of that is it helps reduce climate pollution and helps us to mitigate the climate crisis that we're all facing, and the costs associated with that are certainly escalating right now.
We've seen an uptick in flooding, for instance, in Orangeville, and certainly in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And we're trying to figure it out here, where it came from. Is it hard surfaces in developments in the west end of Orangeville? Is it just an increase in the torrential downpours that happen? And is that part of a new climate cycle we're in? We're not quite sure, but we're going to try and look at some smart city solutions to monitor flood waters and with some sort of warning system. And the town of Orangeville is trying to embrace this, the additional technologies with smart cities. Today, I was at a photo op. We kicked off the $56 million investment by Whiteman Telecom in new future-proof fiber, ultra high-speed fiber internet service in the town of Orangeville. And that's going to be rolled out over the next 2 or 3 years. And having business retention and also attracting new higher technology businesses is really important. And this investment that Whiteman is doing in our town, we're so grateful for them. Hopefully we can springboard into some new industries. And you mentioned the electric vehicle industry. It's really, it's becoming, and it will over the next 10 years be the norm, I think, rather than, it seemed to me very odd that the vehicle manufacturers haven't been advertising very much the sale of electric vehicles. But I think in a conversation you and I had recently, that's about to change. And
absolutely.
The investment of somewhere close to $2 billion in the Ford plant by both Ford and by the province and the federal government is going to make that happen in the short term. So
absolutely. And Sandy, you really highlighted an important issue around broadband access and making sure that everyone in Ontario, whether you live in city of Toronto, or you live in on a farm, or you live in a rural mid-sized city, rural community, is so critically important. This idea that everyone works in downtown Toronto and then we sprawl out all over the place and then have to commute an hour and a half into work, makes no sense from an economic standpoint, a quality of life standpoint, or an environmental standpoint. And so the more we can have that broadband capacity in place, so people can live and work in Orangeville, and not have to commute to downtown Toronto. And, there's so many wonderful reasons to want to live and work in Orangeville, or, in Guelph is the same thing, my community, but also just helping farmers. For example, there's so many technologies now that make farms more sustainable and lower their input costs, but they need broadband access to be able to implement those solutions. And so making sure that we make those kinds of investments, which is a part of making sure Ontario is ready to be a leader in emerging markets, and technology certainly is one of them.
Yeah. Mike, from the first time I met you, I knew you were the right kind of guy to lead the Green Party of Ontario, because you're looking at the pragmatic business side of society, and you cannot forget that conversion of businesses is an important part of embracing green technologies and green initiatives. So, Mike, I want to thank you for joining us. We're at the end of our time here. It went very quickly, but thank you so much for joining us today. And also, you can join us on Facebook at Talk 519.